Hello, I'm Lorraine Weiss. I'm the education coordinator at Shaker Heritage Society, and I've been asked to speak about adaptive use of former Shaker communities. I thought I would start out by talking about the Shaker communities themselves, how they came to be, and how they were formed. The Shakers broke away from the Quakers in Manchester, England in the 1740s. They continued practices such as pacifism and allowing women to fully participate in services, which was very unusual, but also core to this religion. They were also influenced by a group of French Protestants who brought an ecstatic form of worship. They were literally being moved by the Spirit. So they were dancing individualistically. Later, in the turn of the 19th century, these dances became choreographed and highly regulated. But at first, they again were moved by the Spirit, and that's how they acquired the name Shakers, the nickname Shakers. Anne Lee was a young woman who joined the congregation in the 1750s. She became recognized as their leader because of her strong visions and dreams, and she had a very engaging personality. The Shakers were persecuted for their beliefs and their worships. They were threatening the established church. They were beaten and fined and imprisoned, and they decided to immigrate to America, as so many other groups had before and since, and that's just for freedom of religion. They landed in New York City in 1774. 2 years later, they leased land from the Van Rensselaer Manor, north of Albany, in an area known as Niskayuna at the time, later Watervliet. 12 people formed this first settlement in 1776. It's a great time of spiritual revival in the States, and people are looking for a new way of worshiping, a new way of relating to God directly, and they are looking for a new way of salvation. And Anne Lee goes on a missionary journey starting in 1781. It lasts for 2 years. She dies in 1784, so she's only been in the States for 10 years. But at the time of her death, I believe there were about 10 Shaker sites, Shaker communities established, and eventually there will be 24 communities established by Anne Lee and her successors. Their official name is the United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing, and that refers to their belief that Jesus has appeared a second time, and everyone is capable of achieving salvation by living what they call the Christ life. And the basic beliefs are pacifism, confession of sins, celibacy as a path to a pure life. They have a view of God as being both male and female, which translates into belief in all men and women being equal and all races being equal. They're trying to create a heaven on earth. So they are trying for perfection in their everyday work and in their worship. And they, in order to attain these ideals, they believe in separating themselves from the outside world. So as the Shaker communities form in the States, they are settling these separate communities. They are also organizing these communal societies. So it's a communal ownership of property. So they structure this really extraordinary framework for equality and consensus. Men and women are sharing authority at each level of the family, which is what they call their villages. So there are elders and eldresses, who are the religious leaders, trustees, who are the business people, and deacon and deaconesses. I call them the HR department. They're running the everyday details of the communities. And these are also integrated communities. So again, their villages are called families. In Watervliet, which is what this Shaker community is most often called, there were 4 families established over a 35-year period within about a mile of each other. You can see them shown on the 1854 map here. Among the 4 families, eventually they will own or lease about 4,000 to 6,000 acres of land between the South family and that Mohawk River, which is the top of the map. This is a contemporary view of the 4 families. Here is the Albany Airport. Here's the Church family, which is where Shaker Heritage is located. The South family is about a mile away. This is Christian Brothers Academy, for those of you familiar with Albany. The West family is out 155. The North family was where the Shaker Ridge Country Club is today. There are no buildings left there. So this is a view in the 1870s of the Church family. You can see it's a dense village. The meeting house is here on the right. This is the gate that's separating the world, which is what they call non-Shakers, from the Shaker community. And you can see on the 1838 map that this is a planned community. There's a central access. The residential and industrial and work and worship buildings are gathered along here. The agricultural buildings are in an outer ring. Orchards are here. We still have part of an apple orchard remaining. And this is their mill pond, which today is a nature preserve, Anley Pond. These established communities carried on a variety of businesses. They were never completely self-sufficient, so they had commerce with the world. They also needed connections with the world to gain converts for their celibate communities. And so they have this extraordinary framework that allows for collaboration and allows for these very successful businesses to flourish. And again, they're innovators and inventors. They value things being perfect and more efficient. The Watervliet Shakers developed the process of selling seeds in small packages. So growing and processing the seeds, making the envelopes, the boxes, processing them, selling them. It turns into a huge business, not only for Watervliet, but for many other communities. They are making brooms in the 1790s. They're using a type of sorghum, which is called broom corn. And in the early 1800s, Brother Theodore Bates realizes that if he compresses the broom corn in a vise, he can stitch it into a rectangular shape, which is much more efficient for sweeping. Again, they are aiming for more efficiency. So the next time you're sweeping your kitchen, you can thank the Shakers for making the Shaker broom. This turns into a huge industry, again, not only for Watervliet, but in other communities. The American Pharmaceutical Association credits the Shakers with beginning the first herbal medicine industry in the US. That's 1820 in Harvard, Mass. The Watervliet industry starts in 1827 with about 140 items. By 1860, they're selling almost 300 items. And the industry that people are probably most familiar with when it comes to the Shakers is the furniture industry. That is big business at Mount Lebanon and other communities. And it's important to note that all of these industries required their separate buildings and workshops. So you have a lot of the infrastructure, these built communities, making spaces for all of these various activities which are going on at the same time. Here is the herb shop and the Brethren's workshop at the lower right at Watervliet. The Shaker community started to decline after the Civil War for a variety of reasons. Certainly, the celibacy was a challenge, but it was not the only reason. The society is growing more secular. Religion is just not as important as it was in the 1700s. The growth of industry brings more competition that impacts the Shakers' own businesses, and it also provides more opportunities elsewhere for men and women seeking refuge and seeking economic opportunities. And of course, in general, agriculture starts to decline. So the subsequent chapters of all these Shaker communities varies quite dramatically. At Watervliet, the West and North families are the first to close in 1914 and 1918. Both are eventually purchased by private owners who continue farming, and then eventually by owners who convert the buildings into apartments. So here's the West family dwelling house in the 1870s pictured, built in 1828 with a rear wing added in 1886. And here's the building today. It was rehabbed for apartments in the 1940s. You can see inside there are a number of features remaining. You have the dual staircases for men and women. And upstairs, oddly enough, the top two floors were never touched. So those bedrooms are still intact with the built-in cabinets and closets. And there are still the amazing array of storage cupboards in the attic. The Church family closes in 1925. The South family will remain open the longest until 1938. Albany County purchases this property because they're embarking on a new era of social reform and public institutions. They are replacing the outmoded almshouse on New Scotland Avenue with a new as you can see, model county house. And they've determined not to call it the almshouse. They are thinking should be looking at what we would call quality of life issues. The new facility is planned to include recreation rooms, solariums, smoking rooms, and it's just a whole attitude about providing this care. So here you see the drawing on top and the resulting building, which is a massive site just adjacent to the church family. The building starts in about 1928. The plans start in 1926. The facility will not open until 1930. In fact, children are the first patients cared for on the site. There is a preventorium opened in 1928. This is a facility to treat children who have been exposed to tuberculosis, but who haven't come down with the disease. So the Shaker buildings are fitted with these sleeping porches, and they are also gussied up with dormer windows to match the colonial revival style of the new Ann Lee home. And by the way, that new facility is named after Ann Lee very, very deliberately, because of the compassion and charity that the Shakers showed, not only their own people, but the world in general. So these buildings are fitted for the patients over time, variety of patients as needs change over the decades. There's a mental health facility here at the trustee's office, and you can see that the enclosed porches are no longer on the building. Show you the evolution of the site. Here we are in 1925. It's a rather dense site. Albany County decided they didn't need all the buildings, and they just determined which ones they were going to keep and tore down the rest. So we have 9 buildings remaining. So what was a very dense village is now kind of an open oasis. Of the buildings they kept, the ministry was used first for a nurse's residence and then later for the residence of the health commissioner. The laundry building was actually reused as the laundry building. The barn complex was kept. This was a working farm for quite a while. The farm produce was used to feed the patients at the home. This is the hay barn here, cow barn, and manure shed. And this is the interior today of that hay barn, which is used for a variety of public and private events. It's a really glorious space. The little drying house was built to dry fruits from orchards. Each family had their own set of orchards. And when Albany County purchased the property and brought a herd of dairy cattle, they transferred this building to be used as a creamery to produce the dairy products. The meeting house itself experienced the most drastic change of all the buildings. It was sheathed in red brick. It was, the windows were altered and features were added along with the porch to match the colonial revival style of the adjacent Ann Lee home, which you can see here. On the interior, there was a Catholic chapel inserted with pews, an altar. Rooms were divided off. These are the original benches in the back, which were not touched. Fortunately, in the 1980s, after the new nursing home had been built and the county had vacated the site, Shaker Heritage Society was established to promote and protect the remaining Shaker resources. The features of the chapel could be removed. Luckily, they did not touch a lot of the historic fabric. They simply inserted fabric. So you can see the pews and the altar being moved. The original Shaker elements are still here. And the exterior of the building was restored in 2006 with the sheathing coming off, the windows being returned to their original configuration. So today we have the meeting house as it appeared in 1848 when it was originally constructed. Here are the entry doors for the Shakers, sisters, and brethren entered through separate doors. The ministry entered through the middle door. And at the other end of the building is the world's door, because in fact, the world was allowed to come watch the services. And these were the benches for the world. They were not used by the Shakers. Here's the room in 1925, and here's the room as it is today. It's a really glorious space. The ceiling is hung from truss work in the attic. No dancing around columns for the Shakers, and the acoustics are just marvelous. I would be remiss if I didn't mention one other huge alteration. There was a minor league baseball stadium built on the site right next to the Shaker Orchard. Despite the fact that all four families had been listed on the National Register in 1973, and that the Ann Lee Pond was designated a Nature and Historic Preserve in 1977, it didn't stop them from building this new facility. It was demolished in 2009, but you can see barely in the distance, that's the laundry building, and this is the barns over here. So you can see how close it was to the church family site. So other Shaker sites have a variety of experiences. And certainly I should have mentioned back when talking about the apartments, hotels, bed and breakfast, those are frequent uses of some of these buildings, including at Shaker sites that are museums, which have rehabilitated some of the buildings to be used as part of their guest facilities. So that's a popular use. The Shirley community was at first used by the industrial school for boys. That was for delinquent boys. It was a reform school of sorts. Shirley closed in 1908 and the school opened in 1909. The school closed in 1971 and the site then became a prison complex. The variety of treatment and condition of the buildings. The Shirley Historical Society is an all-volunteer nonprofit. Certainly access to the prison grounds is limited, although they are allowed to do some tours every now and then. They've done what they can to raise some money, secure some funding, and in some cases they have been able to document buildings that are beyond saving. In other cases, they have been able to stabilize and mothball buildings. And in some cases, some of the buildings are being used for their programs and also for offices related to the prison. Perhaps the happiest story is that the meeting house was relocated to Hancock Shaker Village to replace the one lost there. And lastly, using the Mount Lebanon community as a great case study, Mount Lebanon became known as the lead ministry. So while Waterville Lead is the first Shaker community in the US, Mount Lebanon, because of its geographic location and other reasons, became the central administration for all of these Shaker communities, all 24 communities. The arrangement of the families, as again, the villages is kind of linear along this main street here. You have 4 families here. And the community closed in 1947, but before that, the central section, the church family and center family, is sold in 1932 to the Darrow School, which is the Lebanon School for Boys initially, and later renamed for the Darrow family, who was a prominent family in the Shaker community here at Mount Lebanon, very early and prominent supporters. So here I've marked the historic buildings that have been reused by the Darrow School, and I've marked on the school campus map those buildings that are historic. And you can see the new ones are kind of tucked back off the road here. So I'll just go through a little bit. Driving along the main road, it's a very subtle entrance to the campus. There's no big sign. You have that little sign here indicated by the red arrow. Again, you have the historic buildings along the road. Here's the Brethren's Workshop and the main dwelling house. On the other side, you have a variety of workshops and very subtle labels on the buildings telling you what they were originally. This is the sugar shack, still used by the students to make maple syrup. Then not only did Darrow adopt the Shaker buildings, but they have taken on a number of the Shaker beliefs and approaches, which is rather interesting. Social justice, racial and gender equality. And then hands to work, the idea of community service and leadership through service. So some of the main buildings, this is again the dwelling house. It was built in 1875, so there were certainly earlier dwelling houses on the site. This is the 1820s meeting house. They are side by side, or they are actually separated by a small courtyard here, which has the ministry, which is where the elders, the religious leaders, would have lived. So it's rather very tight organization here. The library was used as the gym in the 1950s, and then it was converted in the 1960s to a library. So you have a mezzanine, a second layer inserted in the space here, and provides space for the stacks and variety of seating areas. The newer buildings, as I mentioned, have been placed back behind the historic structures. So actually, I should go back. The yellow arrow here is where I'm standing to take the photo. So you can kind of see back in this kind of courtyard setting, you have the newer buildings at the back here. And one of them is called the Dairy Barn. Here is the earlier configuration, designed in 1963, rehabilitated in 2019 to allow more light and reconfigure some of the spaces inside. This has the cafeteria and gym, kind of some of the public facilities for the students. Here you have the Science Center right there, also a 1963 building. And next to it, I think this is, I'm not sure it's called the Sustainability Center, but that's what the site is used for, including a wastewater treatment plant that the students are involved with. Then behind the Dairy Barn, as it's still called, is the Jolene Art Center. You can see again how close they are. And this was built in 2002 to consolidate all of the various visual arts activities that were scattered among buildings on the site. Here's just another view of how it sits in the landscape there. And you can see this is still very much a rural setting. It's a beautiful setting. You can see from that Jolene Center, the tannery just across the campus, built in the 1930s as a tannery, later became a chapel, and then in 1991 was rehabilitated for a performance space, not only for the college, but for the general public. There are a series of concerts here in the summer. And just a quick view from the tannery, again, back to that historic core of the Shaker community with the meeting house and the dwelling house and the ministry. So that's a very brief introduction to just a few of the ways that some of these Shaker sites have been adapted. They're certainly amazing resources and very, very well built. And I look forward to the rest of the conference. Thank you.